You're listening to Haunting Whispers and tonight's tale, Childhood Memories. When I was 10 years old, I witnessed a man die right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to help. It's not something I'm proud of. Back then, I was just a timid kid. My parents, though loving, would sometimes leave me home alone, trusting that I could take care of myself. I'm not saying they didn't love me the way other parents love their only child, because they did, but even so, being an only child came with certain freedoms. Usually, I wasn't the kind of kid to top any list of responsibility, but I enjoyed being alone. It meant I could do whatever I wanted around the house as long as I cleaned up the mess before my parents came home. They'd never know the difference, right? It all happened in early February. My parents had gone out to celebrate Valentine's Day early. It was also their wedding anniversary. They had been married for about 15 years by then, and like every year, they made a big deal out of it. Outside, snow was falling in a beautiful, peaceful way that almost made me want to go for a walk. But I was terrified of accidentally locking myself out and freezing to death before anyone could rescue me. Around 10 p.m., my mom called to say they wouldn't be home until the morning. Naturally, it wasn't the first or last night I had to spend alone, so I promised her I'd lock the doors and go to bed on time. Of course, like any other kid, what I promised and what I actually did were two very different things. Instead of sleeping, I was downstairs watching horror movies well past midnight. Despite the nightmares they gave me, just as my mom always warned, I couldn't get enough of them. Our TV had tons of great channels, so it wasn't hard to find the perfect creepy late night entertainment. Just as I was starting to feel sleepy and thinking about heading to bed, I heard a sudden commotion outside. Alarmed, I glanced out the living room window and saw a man running and screaming in terror. My imagination, already fired up by the horror film, went wild. He was yelling for help, his voice soaked in panic and desperation, pounding on the doors of nearby houses, begging, "Please, someone help me! For God's sake!" He slammed his fists against doors and walls, but most of the houses had gone dark by then. I couldn't look away. What could possibly be scaring him like that? I had always been a kid with an overactive imagination, and this terrified stranger was feeding it. In my mind, I raced through every possible theory, everything from a bloodthirsty serial killer to an actual demon chasing him down the street. It was just a typical suburban neighborhood like thousands of others across the country, where days and nights passed quietly, broken only by the occasional parked car or neighbors bickering about nonsense. Nothing ever happened here. Nothing. Until that night. Eventually, the man reached my house. He banged on the heavy wooden door with both fists, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Please, let me in. They're coming. Please, for the love of God, help me." Curiosity overtook me. I dragged a chair to the door and climbed up to peer through the peephole. He looked fairly young, maybe in his early 20s, though from my 10-year-old perspective, he could have been nearly 50. He had a dark beard, a blue hoodie, a knit cap, and thick gloves. It was freezing outside, and he looked close to dying from the cold. "Please," he whimpered, his voice cracking, holding back tears. "Help me. I'm begging you." I felt horrible for him, but I couldn't let a stranger into the house, no matter how scared he seemed. I wasn't even allowed to invite my friends over when my parents weren't home, let alone a grown man I'd never met. "I can't help you," I shouted through the door, hoping he would realize I was just a kid and move on to the next. But instead of giving up, the man only became more desperate. "Please, kid, I swear to God I won't hurt you. I just need to come inside. Please. I'm not allowed to let strangers in. My dad said so. I'm really sorry. Please, I'm begging you. I'm sorry, I can't. My parents would kill me." Suddenly, he turned around and pressed his back against the door, his head resting just beneath the peephole. I had absolutely no idea what the hell was going on. "Oh, God," he whispered from the other side of the door. I jumped down from the chair and scrambled toward the living room window. Just as my fingers brushed the cold glass, he started screaming again. His cries were now more hysterical, less coherent. He pounded the door even harder than before. I could hear the doorknob rattle as he tried to force his way in, but thankfully, I had locked it, just like Mom told me to. "For the love of God, let me in." I glanced out the window and froze. Three dark shapes darted across the street in front of our house. They were barely visible, like I was looking at them through an out-of-focus camera lens. I couldn't even tell what they were. They moved too fast for my eyes to make sense of them. Whatever they were, fear consumed me. As the figures charged toward the house, I panicked and yanked the curtains shut, then collapsed onto the floor below the window. I pressed my back to the drywall and shook uncontrollably because I knew. Whatever they were, they could tear through the wooden door if they wanted to. Then the man screamed again. This time it was different. A shriek so full of pain and terror it made my skin crawl and my stomach churn. I honestly thought I was about to throw up the half-microwave slice of pizza I'd eaten 30 minutes earlier. The pounding on the door turned violent. A brutal, chaotic rhythm, fists or claws or something else slamming against wood and siding. There were other sounds, too, wet, sloshing noises splattering across the porch and wall panels. I heard snaps, cracks, and the tearing of something thick and sinewy, sounds that reminded me of Dad carving the Thanksgiving turkey. His screams twisted into gurgles, then groans. And then I heard a sound that I refused to believe, a wet, rhythmic chewing. I covered my ears. I tried to force the sound out of my head, of massive jaws gnawing and crunching bone and flesh. But no matter how tightly I clenched my hands over my ears, the sounds kept crawling into the edges of my mind. When the man's muffled, bubbling groans finally faded, something else followed. A chorus of shrill, screeching cries, nothing like anything I'd ever heard. It reminded me of the sound of a balloon deflating rapidly, but louder, rougher, deeper. That noise alone nearly made me lose control of my bladder. My head was spinning. My gut felt like it was tied in a knot, and then silence. But I didn't get up for a long time. I couldn't. I stayed curled beneath the window, that pressed against the wall, trembling. Eventually, I forced myself to get up and bolted upstairs to my room. I locked the door, dove under the covers, and didn't come out. Not until sleep finally overtook me. Of course, even sleep couldn't save me. All it did was amplify the horror in my dreams, stretch every rip, every scream, every bite I had heard into grotesque, surreal nightmares. I was woken the next morning by the sound of police sirens and loud, insistent knocking. I hesitated before peeking out my bedroom window. Police cars, a black SUV, all parked right in front of our house. But I was too terrified to open the door. My parents still hadn't come home. I wasn't just afraid of what might be left behind out there. I was afraid the police might somehow blame me, might make me responsible for what happened. So I stayed put, sat there in silence, pretending no one was home as the knocking grew louder and louder. Eventually, the banging stopped, but the cops didn't leave. Not until my parents finally returned about half an hour later. I heard my dad's panicked voice outside, speaking frantically with the officers. Then the front door clicked open, and I heard my mom's footsteps pounding up the stairs. She tried the doorknob to my room, but it was locked. So she just knocked and knocked, shouting my name, begging me to let her in. Her voice and the banging on the wood made me shiver. After everything that had happened the night before, it all felt too loud, too real. Slowly, I crawled out from beneath the blankets, opened the door for my mother, and the moment our eyes met, she immediately wrapped her arms around me. After a few minutes of holding me tightly, she began inspecting me, gently touching my face and arms, as if checking to see whether I had been hurt. Once she was sure I was unharmed, she finally asked whether I knew what had happened, or if I'd heard anything during the night. I wasn't sure why I lied, claiming I had been asleep the whole time and hadn't heard a thing. Maybe deep down I felt guilty about what I believed had happened to that terrified man begging for help. Or maybe I just didn't want my parents to know I had stayed up so late. Whatever the reason, I played dumb and would continue with that story to anyone who asked over the following weeks. Not long after, my father came inside, once the crowd and traffic outside had thinned out, leaving only a police cruiser and a black SUV parked along the curb. 2 officers and a few men in suits, probably detectives, began going house to house, knocking on doors, searching for anyone who might have witnessed the terrible attack. Days turned to nights, and nights to days. It all felt surreal and unsettling, but honestly, I stopped caring. After a few weeks, kids at school had already started spreading exaggerated rumors about the murder that supposedly happened in front of my house. No body was ever found, only a pool of blood soaking the grass and walkway and splatters on the door and wall. Some claim there was more blood than a human body could even hold, fueling countless stories during the first week after the event. For months after that man begged to be let in, my parents refused to leave me home alone. Honestly, I didn't mind. Sure, I missed being able to run and jump around the house whenever I wanted, but my parents became more attentive than ever. Yes, I had to tag along for errands I had no interest in, but I usually squirmed enough to get a toy or candy out of it. As I said from the beginning, I never blamed my parents for being irresponsible. They had no way of knowing danger would show up at our door that night. But of course, their new cautious mindset didn't last. Over time, they relaxed, deciding that nothing was really worth worrying about, that what happened was just a once-in-a-lifetime accident. It wasn't until mid-December that I was left home alone again. My parents had been invited to an early Christmas party with some old friends. They asked if I was okay staying alone and not wanting to be left with a babysitter, probably just a few years older than me. I said I'd be fine. Truthfully, though I liked having their attention around the holidays, I missed the freedom of being by myself. As usual, my mom called around 10 p.m. I told her everything was fine. She said they'd be home in about an hour and reminded me to try and go to bed soon. Of course, I had no intention of sleeping until I saw headlights roll into the driveway, but she didn't need to know that. After a while of sliding down the stairs on my makeshift Captain America shield, I decided to kill time by finding an R-rated horror movie to watch. It was close to midnight when the knocking started, pulling my attention away from Jason chasing a panicked, half-naked woman through the woods. "Let me in," a voice said from outside. I froze, every muscle tensing, memories of the terrified man from 10 months ago flooding back. Just a puddle of blood now, staining the grass. My dad had to repaint the entire front of the house to cover the splashes, but the red stains on the concrete walkway never came out. "Let me in, kid. Please." I turned the TV volume up all the way, trying to drown out the voice. "Help me. Please, let me in." The voice grew louder, not shouting, but increasing in volume like someone turning a dial. I crept over to the window and looked outside. Strangely, no one was there. The street was silent. Still, the man's voice came from right behind the door. "Just let me in. I won't hurt you," he promised. I quietly dragged a chair to the door, climbed up and looked through the peephole, and froze when I accidentally bumped the chair against the door. "I know you're in there, kid. Please, let me in." I peeked again. Still no one. Just the empty lawn and the dark red stains on the path. "You can save me. You know you can." Still no sign of anyone. I even tried looking downward through the tiny lens, thinking maybe someone was crouching. But the voice came from eye level. I tried convincing myself I'd had too much candy, or maybe knocked something loose while sliding down the stairs. After several more minutes of whispers and pleading from the invisible man outside, I turned off the TV and went to bed. Even with the fan I always used to create white noise, I could still hear him. It now sounded like the voice came from just outside my second-floor window. I buried my head between two pillows, but nothing could mute the desperate cries. "Don't go to sleep and leave me out here, kid. Just let me in." The voice only stopped when I saw the streak of car headlights painting the far wall of my bedroom. My parents were home. For years, it kept happening. Always near midnight. Always when I was alone. I eventually begged my parents not to leave me home alone, and even asked for a babysitter again. They agreed. Having someone with me each time they went out was fine. But that ended when I turned 12. Sometimes I could plan sleepovers at friends' houses, but there were nights I couldn't avoid being alone. No matter how many times it happened, I never got used to it. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't block it out. Whenever my parents left overnight, the voice returned, relentless, until I finally fell into an uneasy sleep. And even that took effort. Years passed. Childhood faded. I went to college and had a roommate. I tried joining as many clubs and activities as I could to avoid being alone in the dorm after hours. Still, the voice found me. No matter where I went in life, it followed. After graduation, I asked my dorm roommate to rent a place with me. That kept the late-night visits away, for the most part. But I couldn't stop my roommate from having his own life. For a while, it only came on weekends when I was alone. Eventually, my roommate moved in with his girlfriend. I was alone again. I tried finding another roommate, but my erratic behavior and desperate attitudes scared off anyone interested. So the knocking returned, the screams, the begging. The louder I tried to ignore it, the louder it became. In desperation, I even booked hotel rooms, hoping busy hallways would shield me. But as long as I was alone, the knocking began, right at midnight. It wouldn't stop until dawn. I fought for months against the edge of madness. Nothing worked. Earplugs, noise-canceling headphones, blasting music. I'd scream back in rage or despair, unable to escape it. And finally, after countless sleepless nights, I couldn't take it anymore. Once again, I looked through the peephole. Once again, no one. Just knocking, and the voice, and the sound of breathing. My heart pounded erratically as if it were about to burst through my sternum. I clenched my trembling fingers around the doorknob and pulled it open. My jaw nearly dropped to my chest when my eyes met the shredded figure in front of me. Half of his face looked like it had been torn off, exposing a flushed red skull and strips of muscle tissue where skin once was. His left arm had been ripped clean from the shoulder, making it nearly impossible to tell muscle from bone beneath the tangled scraps of his inner shirt and the torn hoodie hanging loosely outside. His stomach had been split wide open, organs spilled onto the floor, blood-dripping intestines dangling in a pool of bright crimson. Both of his legs were a grotesque blend of minced raw meat and splintered bone, barely held together by anything at all. Somehow, his right arm was the only part untouched, outstretched, fist clenched, ready to knock again. "Thank you, man," he said, trying to smile with the only half of his face still capable of expression. "You're a lifesaver." We just stared at each other for a moment before he collapsed at my feet with a sickening series of cracks and wet snaps, his body twisted unnaturally, compressing and folding in on itself, smoke rising from his convulsing form before he melted into the soft welcome mat beneath the porch and the hard concrete of the sidewalk. Within seconds, he was gone, reduced to nothing more than a dark red scorch mark. In a panic, I kicked the damp, blood-stained rug, still bearing the filthy imprint of his feet, off the porch, uncovering more stains hidden beneath. That was all that remained. Though my mind reeled and my mouth hung open, I stepped out, dragging the mat with me and tossing it into the trash at the curb. The word welcome was no longer visible, just a few burnt, warped letters lost among grotesque, blackened smears. I held the mat by its one unstained corner, studying it with curled lips and revulsion before throwing it away. I stood outside, staring at my house, dazed. Was that really all it took to end the madness? Were the nightly visits finally over? I started giggling like a madman. The pure, unfiltered insanity of what had tormented me for years almost shattered my already fragile mind. I stepped back toward the open door, feeling like whatever reason I had left might slip out of my skull for good. But just before I could enter, I heard a sound behind me, like a stampede of wild animals pounding down the sidewalk. I turned sharply and saw three monstrous, dog-like creatures bolting across the street toward me. Thick saliva dripped from their snarling mouths as they charged, their muscular, fur-matted legs thundering over the pavement. I screamed, lunging into the house, slamming the door behind me and fumbling to lock it, just as the creatures crashed into it with terrifying force, nearly knocking me to the ground. My chest rose and fell in rapid bursts, goosebumps pricking every inch of my skin, sweat pouring from my pores in cold sheets. Their snarls and growls roared outside, mixed with the grinding, pulping sound you'd hear if someone shoved 50 pounds of frozen meat into a wood chipper. For whatever reason, they didn't attack again after the initial slam, perhaps just unable to stop in time from their frenzied chase. But I had no doubt that if they truly intended to get in, my door's simple locks wouldn't hold them for long. Peeking through the peephole, I saw them pacing back and forth, drool pooling beneath them, every guttural growl sending chills through me. Each one was massive, easily twice, maybe 3 times the size of the biggest dog I'd ever seen. Their limbs bulged with rippling muscle, mouths full of cracked, yellowed fangs. Each of their 6 eyes glowed a bright, searing orange beneath furrowed, wrinkled brows. When I finally regained a shred of composure, I realized I was in for another sleepless night. I pulled the biggest kitchen knife from the rack, slumped onto the couch, and stared at the front door, still trembling all over. Of course, no kitchen knife could protect me from monsters like these. I clutched the handle like a child gripping a toy shield, praying they wouldn't try to force their way inside. At some point, I must have passed out because when I woke up, I was slumped on the couch, the knife lying on the floor beside me. My body ached from the awkward sleep, but my fuzzy mind immediately registered the silence. No growling, no scratching, no cries. I could only hope they were gone. Nervously, I cracked the door open and saw nothing but stained concrete under the gray morning light. My nerves stayed taut the rest of the day. Any sudden sound or barking from a neighbor's dog sent my heart into my throat. Still, I dared to hope, maybe, just maybe, things were going back to normal. Normal for me, anyway. But it wasn't until I was driving home from an after-hours drink with coworkers that I realized how deep this madness would go. The sun had already dipped below the horizon. Before, I never would have worried about that, at least not until midnight. Driving down my street, starlight above and moonlight scattered across the rooftops, street lamps casting long shadows, that's when I heard it again. Not normal barking, not normal growling. I checked my rearview mirror and saw them. The same three grotesque, fur-covered beasts tearing after my car. Panicked, I slammed my foot on the gas. My Nissan roared forward. I was terrified, not just for myself, but for anyone else unlucky enough to be on the street. But in that moment, nothing else mattered except getting home. I screeched into my driveway, tires tearing up the grass. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I sprinted for the front door, practically feeling their foul breath on my neck. Shaking, fumbling with the keys, I dared not look back. When the lock finally clicked and the door swung open, I stumbled inside, collapsed to the floor, and kicked the door shut just as the creatures smashed into it. Another night of snarling, clawing, and howling from the other side. That's how I live now. I never go out after dark anymore, no matter what. And I feel panic set in every time the sun drops below the trees, even inside the supposed safety of my home. I don't visit people. I don't invite anyone over. Socializing only increases the chance I'll be caught somewhere without a door between me and them. No, it's not the life I wanted, but at least I'm still alive. Sometimes I wonder, if I had let that stranger in the very first night when he begged me, would this curse have passed on to me? Or would he have passed it to a 10-year-old kid instead? I doubt I'll ever know. But there must be a way to end this nightmare, right? If you take nothing else from this story, remember this. You don't know who I am. I haven't described myself. I've kept my identity hidden. You might not know it's me. But if I ever come knocking after dark, no matter how much I beg, no matter how much I cry, don't answer. And for God's sake, don't let me in. If I'm going to die, let me die alone.